That night, I stormed out of the house, fueled not just by anger, but by an unshakable resolve. With just a suitcase in hand and steam pouring from my ears, I left the small-town roots behind. I felt like the heroine in a movie, smashing my way through the barriers my parents had built, those barriers painted as love, but really, they were just a refusal to see me. I swore I'd make them regret their choices and perhaps even learn that dreams aren't meant to be so easily dismissed. Fast forward 10 years, and here I am, Taylor Dawson, finance wizard extraordinaire. Picture a corner office in downtown Chicago with view-worthy skyscrapers fitting right into the frame. As the CFO of a booming fintech company, people see the glass walls and designer suits, mistaking my success for a fairy tale where a family of cheerleaders catapults their daughter to greatness. Little do they know, I'm here on pure grit and the hot embers of suppressed ambition. My childhood tales are not the ones you hear on TV. I grew up in a quaint Ohio town where Friday night football matches and whispered gossip defined the social hierarchy. My parents fell into the quaint mold of middle-class folks, my dad, Mark, a regional manager who preferred spreadsheets to small talk, and my mom, Linda, whose part-time bookkeeping gigs kept her too occupied to engage in my limitless dreams. The family dinners looked good, but trust me, behind the facade, I was the invisible girl in a world spotlighting my golden brother, Derek. Oh, Derek, the epitome of mediocrity somehow crowned king. 3 years older, he could charm anyone with his laid-back attitude while effortlessly scoring CS and DS on his report cards. My parents insisted he was just a late bloomer, showering him with praise while I was expected to be the diligent, quiet daughter. My grades shot through the roof, while any hope of getting financial backing for tutoring or prep courses crumbled into dust. "You'll figure it out," Dad said, and so, I did, albeit with no support. When the Yale acceptance letter arrived, it felt akin to winning the lottery. I tore it open in our kitchen, heart racing, hands trembling as I read the glorious words, full tuition, housing, and books, all covered. I believed my dreams had transformed into glorious reality. Rushing to show my mom, I could envision our celebratory dinner, basking in pride. Yet, all I got instead was a curt, tight-lipped acknowledgement, leading me to grapple with an unspoken disappointment lingering in the air. I soon realized that the excitement of going to Yale had been eclipsed by a foreboding silence. That tight smile was a warning, a prelude to a crushing conversation that never came. What's worse? It foreshadowed the greatest betrayal of all, my parents' decision to prioritize my brother's path over mine, severing the dreams that had once felt so reachable. Their thinking was insidious. They viewed my aspirations as an extravagance, something they could simply cut from their lives like a budget line item. Fast forward again, to 10 years later. Derek's failures have turned into family tragedy, and my parents stand with outstretched hands, demanding $500,000 like it's my personal obligation to clean up their mess. Not a shout escaped my lips, nor did a single tear fall. I reached for the documents instead, hard and sharp, and slid them across the table. In that moment, silence engulfed the room as they stared at the evidence of their misguided decisions, unable to predict the downfall of their misplaced trust. Turns out, life has quite a sense of humor and, thankfully, I'm the punchline. That night, I was practically bursting at the seams as I waited for my parents to bring up the elephant in the room, my acceptance letter to Yale. Dinner was a typical affair, with Dad droning on about work and Derek blabbering about his latest video game obsession. The crumpled acceptance letter was like a hot coal in my pocket, but I kept my excitement under wraps, hoping they were just waiting for the right moment to throw me a surprise party. Spoiler alert, no confetti came. Days dragged on and my parents only danced around the topic of my acceptance, with Mom reassuring me that we'd talk soon. Dad offered a half-hearted promise to figure it out, all while Derek's rejection letters began to rain down like confetti, each one a brutal reminder of the sibling rivalry. "Don't worry, bud," Mom would comfort Derek, and Dad would play the motivational speaker, promising to make some calls. I stayed hopeful, they must just need to process the idea of 2 kids heading to crossroads. When Mom announced a special Sunday dinner, my heart did a happy dance. Finally, I thought. Fancy table settings, pot roast, and a bottle of Dad's rare wine whispered of a celebratory vibe. I sat there, practically vibrating with anticipation, imagining Dad lifting his glass and shouting about how proud he was of me. Instead, he cleared his throat and said something that made my heart drop faster than a bad video game character. "Taylor, we need you to decline Yale." I snorted, thinking it was a bad punchline, but the look on his face made it abundantly clear this was no joke. Dad launched into a speech about budgeting and resources, suggesting I take the community college route while focusing everything on Derek's college dreams. Mom chimed in, "You're smart, honey. You'll do fine anywhere," which felt like a consolation prize I never wanted. I was supposed to sacrifice my dreams for Derek? Seriously? Just as I started to process this twist, Derek leaned back, doing the whole innocent angel thing like he hadn't just won a life lottery. "Hey, don't look at me," he said, hands raised. My voice shook as I confronted Dad. "You want me to give up Yale? For him?" My heart raced while Mom's voice broke with the selfish card. That word hit harder than anything. Here I was, not just a hard-working student but also a complete outsider in my own family's dreams. The argument exploded, turning the dining room into a battleground. My dad's raised voice and Mom's muffled sobs turned the pot roast cold. The conversation escalated until finally, Dad's temper hit max level, thundering out a threat. "Decline by Monday, or you're out." All I could do was sit in stunned silence, the room swirling around me while I processed the reality that my life had just taken a nosedive off a cliff I never wanted to stand on in the first place. As the cold pot roast mocked me, I tossed and turned that night. My spirit was restless, my dreams teetering on the edge of oblivion. The ceiling fan spun mechanically above, echoing the repetitive thoughts selfish, ungrateful, decline over and over until they became a jumbled mess in my mind. My heart felt trapped beneath the weight of it all, and sleep? Well, let's just say it was as elusive as a rare Pokémon in a sea of Charmanders. By morning, the stench of despair had lingered long enough in my family home. Derek, with his smug grin, and my parents, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing, made me feel like a permanent fixture rather than family. Suddenly, an idea as sweet as Grandma Margaret's cookies popped into my head. My dad's mom was the antithesis of our chaotic household. She was strong, independent, and ran her own antique shop. Unlike my parents, she genuinely cared about me, embracing every visit with warmth, cookies, and questions about my life that felt like they were worth answering. With a shaky resolve and quivering fingers that threatened to ruin my phone call, I reached out to Grandma. Once I spilled my heart, her response was like lightning in a bottle. "Pack your things. Come here." Simple, straight to the point, no lecture about family drama or emotional baggage. That was the lifeline I needed, and boy, did I grab it. The next morning, before dawn had a chance to wake up my family, I tiptoed through our dark house, stuffing my life into trash bags, trying not to wake the snoring beasts that were my parents and Derek. The drive to Grandma's didn't take long, but every mile felt like a journey across a mystical border, and finally, I arrived at her cozy home. Standing on the porch with a steaming cup of coffee and a perfectly toasted slice, she looked like a scene straight out of a family sitcom, minus the laugh track. No questions, just an embrace that wrapped around me like a warm blanket on a cold day. "You're safe now" was the reassurance I didn't know I needed, a promise of refuge from the storm I left behind. As the days unraveled, we orchestrated a new game plan. My dreams of Yale were dashed since my parents were playing their own little strategy game, and I'd missed the deadline. But Grandma had a knack for turning lemons into lemonade. "It's not Yale," she encouraged, "but community college could be a stepping stone." It wasn't the glamorous dream I had, but with her by my side, it felt like a launch pad instead of a fallback option. I nodded through my tears because she was right. Sometimes a path is better than no path at all. Grandma didn't stop there. She opened her heart and her wallet, securing a deposit for a dinky studio apartment near school. She found me a job at a local diner, where I'd become an honorary grease stain, and surprises were never far behind. "Family takes care of each other," she'd say, sliding $20 bills into my textbooks when she thought I wasn't looking. This was my first lesson about real family, a support system that wanted to lift me above the ordinary. My new life wasn't exactly a glamorous montage. Community college was more about navigating a maze of aging brick buildings with an underlying scent of burnt coffee than it was about living the dream. My studio apartment had walls so thin that I could practically hear my neighbor's morning alarm before my own. But each ding of reality was a note in the symphony I was creating, my own slice of freedom, flawed but fiercely mine. The first few months turned into a grueling montage of classes and diner shifts. I was weaving through the chaos, with greasy floors and the clattering symphony of dishes making up my soundtrack. Evenings stretched into mornings as I returned home, reeking of coffee and hash browns, yet still found the gumption to crank out assignments. I was running on coffee, hope, and a sprinkle of Grandma's wisdom. With zero tolerance for slacking off, I concentrated on maintaining solid grades so I could transfer to a better place. The race had just begun. Life had turned into a culinary experiment, and I was pretty much failing. Here I was, subsisting on day-old diner rolls, instant ramen, and my very own adrenaline-fueled survival strategy. My parents called occasionally, but their numbers buzzing on my phone only churned my stomach. Sometimes I'd brave their voicemails. Dad called me dramatic, Mom begged me to come home. They didn't get it. I dashed their calls into the void, feeling a little rebellious and a lot hungry. My brother, Eric, decided it was snippet text appropriate to label me selfish and a family traitor. So, I did what any level-headed sibling would do. I blocked him faster than you can say there's plenty of ramen in the cupboard. Thank goodness for Grandma. She swooped in like a culinary superhero, dishing out Sunday dinners that perfumed the air with roast chicken and pies, creating a haven of comfort. She filled my fridge with leftovers, but we both knew there was no such thing as too much Grandma cooking. Just over a year had passed when I finally made a bold move. I applied to transfer to Ohio State. A giddy thrill danced through me when the acceptance letter arrived, spiced by a partial scholarship. I dashed to Grandma's shop, waving that piece of life-altering mail like a trophy. She let out a girlish squeal, setting down her porcelain project to envelop me in a hug so tight, I feared the universe itself would cave in. "You see," she whispered, clearly throwing all her support behind me. It was all just the beginning, and oh boy, what a beginning. Ohio State was a different planet. Bigger classes, more students, albeit fiercer competition, wannabe scholars scrapping for attention. I snagged a part-time library gig and took on weekend hostessing at a downtown restaurant, desperately trying to excavate a shortcut to adulthood. Meanwhile, Grandma kept me posted on the family plot twist, Eric flunking out of relevance, thanks to Mom and Dad refinancing their home to finance his rollercoaster education ride. Every time she told me, I felt a little pang. How long could that financial circus last? As time ticked by, Grandma's updates got gloomier. Eric, my poor brother, encountered academic probation, then suspension for vandalizing a frat house. A semester later, and yes, you guessed it, he was booted out. My parents, frantic as ever, brought in a lawyer like he was a family doctor for bad decisions. In hot pursuit of another desperate chance, they transferred him to a small school in Florida. However, just like the last line in a well-worn sitcom, he dropped out after a semester and resurfaced at home, trading ambition for poker chips and late-morning Netflix binges. Meanwhile, I was, thanks to Ohio State's magic, barreling toward my own degree in finance, a field where the numbers made sense to me, unlike the chaos that had colored my upbringing. I graduated summa cum laude, take that, childhood uncertainty. Even better, a consulting firm plucked me right from campus. The salary wasn't rolling in bills amounts, but I finally had real cash that reaffirmed those late-night study sessions had purpose. I sank into a conversion of an apartment with real furniture, where not a single milk crate or duct tape was in sight. With life feeling surprisingly stable, I wasn't done yet. My firm offered tuition stipends for grad school, and I jumped at the chance. Case Western Reserve accepted me with partial funding and, oh boy, was I ready. Juggling work and night classes became my life's new gym routine. I'd drag myself through exhausting days, bursting into lectures like I was breaking through the finish line at a marathon. 5 to 9 was my new normal, studying till midnight while dreaming of ramen-free futures. It was hard, but that was precisely the fuel propelling me toward the life I craved, one number at a time. Graduating with my MBA felt like a marathon I had finally completed. It was exhausting, sure, but nothing compared to those wild days at community college. My grandma Margaret was my biggest fan, capturing every moment like a snap-happy tourist. When the graduation ceremony ended, she beamed with pride, as if she was the one earning the degree. I could practically hear the click of her camera shutter echoing in her joy. Later that night, at a chic restaurant in Cleveland, Grandma insisted on ordering champagne to toast my success. To the granddaughter who refused to be overlooked, she proclaimed, her voice booming with pride. I felt a lump form in my throat but clinked my glass against hers. The soft flicker of candlelight surrounded our table as we savored our crème brûlée, but the mood got serious when she dropped the bombshell about her will. Talk about dessert taking a dark turn. Taylor, I've thought long and hard about this, she began, catching me off guard. She conveyed an intensity one rarely saw, and I tried to brush off her concerns. You're only 77, Grandma. You're still running the antique shop with Grace, I reasoned. But she wasn't having it. With fire in her eyes, she stated, your parents chose favorites, and it was wrong. Everything I have is going to you. My spoon froze mid-air, her words hanging heavy in the air like the last bite of that creamy dessert. 5 years rolled by, and I still felt the weight of her declaration. But nothing could prepare me for that fateful day when Grandma Margaret passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82. I felt as if the ground beneath me shattered into a million pieces. The church hosted the funeral, stunning stained glass casting colorful shadows on a sea of mourners, with organ music floating through the air. It was meant to be a solemn event, but the air was thick with tension, especially with my parents glaring at me from across the aisle. As I stood at the service, I could feel the unspoken whispers of relatives, their eyes calculating what they could potentially grab. Her house is probably worth a fortune, one muttered. It was unnerving, the sting of greed hanging in the air heavy enough to slice through the solemnity of the moment. I knew the readings and the will were imminent, and all eyes were on me like I was some kind of lucrative prize. A week later, we were gathered in the polished oak office of Mr. Harris, Grandma's lawyer. The smell of old paper and dust mixed with tension as the will was passed around, and I could tell my parents never bothered reading theirs. They were clearly banking on Grandma's loyalty, blissfully unaware of her intentions. Mr. Harris cleared his throat before diving into the reading about my inheritance, summoning the spirit of my spirited grandma back into the room. The moment he announced the house's worth around $800,000 and her profitable antique business, the room buzzed like bees. My mom squeezed her purse until her knuckles turned white. Then, as if it was a smack in the face, Mr. Harris announced the staggering $1 inheritance to my dad and his wife. The silence that followed was deafening until my father erupted, accusing me of manipulation. But Mr. Harris calmly revealed the airtight caveat, a legally binding document that declared Grandma was of sound mind. It was like a round of applause for Grandma's final act of defiance, and the echoes of my mother's sob rang in my ears. My heart was a cocktail of half anger and half despair as I faced the swirling chaos woven into my very being. How could you do this to us, Taylor? My mom pleaded, her voice quaking with faux sadness. I held my ground, sharp and calm. You stopped being my parents the moment you asked me to toss my dreams in the trash. They fought back, launching a lawsuit that painted me as a villain enjoying Grandma's influence. As the courtroom drama unfolded like a wacky soap opera, the truth spilled out with each witness. It was my high school guidance counselor's turn to shine when she recited the unfortunate tale of my parents choosing Derek's SAT prep over my education. Former neighbors chimed in, confirming the resources Derek garnered while I was left to fend for myself. The estate remained rightfully mine, but as we all know, desperate circumstances begat desperate people. Just 6 months post-ruling, my phone buzzed, and I picked up an unfamiliar number. "Taylor, it's your mother," she sobbed like a serious drama queen. "We need $500,000. The bank's gonna foreclose on the house, just a month's loan." My mind wheeled, processing the request like it was a cosmic joke. "Where exactly do you expect to get $500,000 in 30 days? Her insistence shot through me like an ice-cold arrow. "They were family," she reminded me. And oh, the bitter laughter that erupted from me was more reflex than emotion. "Family? You mean when you told me to ditch Yale, or when Dad suggested I could find the curb more comfortable than his roof? That version of family?" There was only silence from her end. The audacity of her hardened response left me speechless, dotted by her claim that it was all about Derek, always Derek, the burden I'd borne my whole life. With a click, I severed that connection. The emails started rolling in like annoying spam. Dad's lengthy rants accused me of manipulating Grandma and claiming he was entitled to her estate as the ever-so-painful only son. Meanwhile, my brother Derek fired off venomous "you owe us" messages like a child playing dodgeball with a grudge. The pièce de résistance. A threatening letter from a new attorney. I slid the abomination across Mr. Harris's desk and watched him draft a response that practically shone with glee as he obliterated their flimsy arguments. Throughout this wild ride, I was crushing it at work. My consulting gig upgraded into finance director at a hot tech startup, and my antique shop duplicated its success with a new location. A scholarship fund I started in Grandma's name. Blessedly successful, helping students ascend to college heights. But their echoes of disdain clung to me like a pesky tag on a new shirt. Selfish, ungrateful, manipulative. Those voices pressed into my thoughts like nails. Some nights of insomnia turned into flashbacks of my family dinners, the chilled pot roast, my father's ultimatum ticking like a dramatic clock, and my mother telling me I didn't need the fancy degree. Those memories fortified me against guilt like armor. When my parents came pleading, I wasn't a tornado of emotions. I simply slid courtroom documents across the table. Their days of arguing with airtight wills and court orders were over. Paper, after all, can be sturdier than blood. The moment they realized there was no turning back, it felt like a weight lifting off me. The tables had turned, but this story still had a twist or two left. Their downward spiral started to pick up speed once the legal mayhem settled. Our family home, renovated, refinanced, and remodeled, became just another victim of foreclosure. I heard from a former neighbor that the foreclosure notice was plastered on the door like some dreadful badge of shame. When the locks were finally changed, my parents had already scurried off to a cramped, dimly lit apartment outside of Dayton. With Dad in his late 50s, the job market resembled a dangerous game of musical chairs. Young gun candidates were jumping at the chance to work longer hours for peanuts. Ultimately, Dad settled for a night shift as a warehouse security guard, hardly the glamorous end he'd envisioned. Meanwhile, Mom tackled the challenges of cleaning offices, wrestling trash bags that looked heavier than she was. And then there's Derek, skipping town to Texas to escape the mounting debt sharks circling him like hungry vultures. Rumor had it Derek was getting by on odd jobs and couch surfing, all while dodging anyone with a payment plan. His gambling debts were like bad horror movie villains, lingering way longer than expected. Sometimes well-meaning acquaintances would approach me, their voices dripping with pity, suggesting I should step in and help my folks. "They're still your parents," they'd say, as if a simple bloodline could erase the past, a past where they chose to prioritize Derek over me. But I wasn't helping those who let me down. Instead, I turned my focus to creating a scholarship fund in Grandma Margaret's honor. My mission was simple: help ambitious girls who felt trapped in families lacking belief in them. Reading through applications was a cathartic release, and when I granted the scholarships, I visualized handing them the keys to a liberated life. Meanwhile, the antique shop that Grandma nurtured began to flourish. Thanks to a savvy manager and a splash of modern marketing, my humble venture blossomed into 3 bustling stores across Ohio. As I raised the stakes in business, my own star began to rise. After completing my MBA, I hopped on board a tech startup just in time for their explosive growth. Before I knew it, I wasn't stuck with spreadsheets anymore. I was now steering the ship as CFO at 29. Sure, that title didn't erase my past, but it did catapult me to a level the same critics thought I'd never reach, reminding me that my worth was more than that pity label they'd stuck on me. Ironically, while my parents sacrificed everything for Derek, banking on their golden boy to win it all, he floundered. With both my parents struggling, it was clear that the daughter they deemed insignificant had risen to be the only one standing tall. However, the truth was, I wasn't standing for them but rather, reclaiming my narrative. Just last month, I found Derek lurking on LinkedIn. His overly vague message about reconnecting looked more pitiful than inviting. My finger hovered over the ignore button, not out of anger, but indifference. It's a subtle power move. If love ties you to someone, indifference completely cuts the cord. A friend in Dayton shared scenes of my parents' new reality, Mom flipping through coupons at the grocery store, counting coins like they were precious gems, while Dad's exhausted form patrolled his dimly lit warehouse with a flashlight. Do I feel sorry for them? Not really. They made their bed years ago, picking pot roast and wine over recognizing me as equal to their son, and now it was too late for any changes. That fateful night at the dinner table was a turning point for me. I sat there, anticipation bubbling in my stomach, ready for the compliments that never came. Instead, I was met with an ultimatum, a sharp jab that cut deeper than any knife. As I replay that moment in my mind, I can't help but wonder if my parents ever reflect on it. Do they grasp that it was their favoritism for Derek that ultimately severed our bond? Probably not. Some people are spectacularly adept at blindfolds, especially when it comes to accountability. Their concept of family loyalty was a one-way street, and they never hesitated to trample on my dreams. They thrived on a narrative that painted me as the selfish one, oblivious to their stinging words that belittled me. But hey, you know what? Their cruelty became my fuel. In a bizarre twist of fate, their rejection was the catalyst that ignited my resilience. Each brick of adversity I faced became a stepping stone, paving my path towards success in a world that had seemed so unwelcoming. Let's face it, had my folks supported me, I might have strolled onto the Yale campus, basked in their glow of approval, and landed a plush job. It sounds dreamy, doesn't it? But here's where it gets juicy. In that alternate universe, I would have missed out on the grit and gratitude that life's little wins bring. Now, I cherish each accomplishment like a rare gem. I wouldn't trade my hard-fought victories for a million Yale diplomas. I've got a tenacity that can't be taught. Grandma Margaret, the unsung heroine, saw through the family favoritism. She was a sharp-eyed observer of their tragic comedy. No way was she going to let them get away with sidelining me for Derek. Her estate wasn't just a stack of cash, it was a magnificent middle finger aimed at the systemic injustice within our family. In a grand gesture, she bestowed everything upon the underdog, me. It sent a message that reverberated through my soul, grounding me in my beliefs about worth and merit. That legacy has blossomed since then. The scholarship fund I established is thriving, providing opportunities to countless young women who remind me of myself. With each turn of the school year, I revel in the letters that slide into my inbox, tales of triumph woven with gratitude. These women don't just chase dreams, they catch them. Each story fills a folder on my desk, right alongside Grandma's brass key, a tangible reminder of the battles we've fought. Amidst all the success and satisfaction, you won't find me tossing and turning over my parents or sorrowing for Derek. I've constructed a vibrant life studded with mentors, colleagues, and friends who enrich my journey. The girl they believed was destined for mediocrity She's now a CFO, running her own business and lifting others along the way. Meanwhile, the golden child they hitchhiked to success is a dim memory, a fleeting thought, making me smile at the irony of it all. You want to know how I sleep at night? Like a baby. Knowing my worth and embracing my evolution quiets any lingering doubts. Sure, I've been stitched together with wounds from favoritism and rejection, but they only stitched me into something stronger. And if this tale resonated with you, don't leave without a piece of this growing community. Subscribe and engage, share your story of family struggles in the comments. Because together, we can spin the narrative of justice in our own lives.